Hello, I'm Bob Matheny. I'm Mayor of Zebulon, and this is, of course, the Zebulon Mayor Show. And joining me is my friend Zeb, and we're going to talk about dogs and animals here in just a little bit. And that's why I brought him along today, just to add a little flavor. We had a work session on March 19th that actually was a combination of our first meeting of the month that we canceled due to inclement weather. But even at that, I mean, we combined the two agendas into the work session, and it was still a very short session. Basically, we put out, or approved rather, the merger of trash collection into 1 day a month. I mean, one day a week instead of the split days like we used to have. You used to pick up on Mondays and Tuesdays, depending on what part of town you lived in. Now everything will be picked up on Mondays, and the recycling will still be picked up every other week. Now this is early April that we're filming this, so this went into effect actually this week, and you should have received a mailer, you should have received a phone call notifying you, and then you'll also be receiving something to put on the recycling container to tell you when the pickups will be. So that was pretty short and sweet. It was a money-saving move on the collector's part to be able to do it all in 1 day. We then also took a look at our personnel policy, and that had been under review by our attorneys, and it just cleared up some inconsistencies in the town's personnel policy. Nothing, no major changes, no earth-shattering news about that, but that was part of the agenda. And then basically that was it. It was a very short and sweet agenda, and we moved forward. Okay, we're going to shift gears. As I said, we're going to talk about pets and animals, and the police chief is going to join me, so we'll be back in just a second. Okay, we're back, and joining me is Chief Tim Hayworth, the Zebulon Police Chief. Tim, glad to have you here today.
Thanks, Mayor. Good to be here.
Now, we're also in Whitley Park, in case you didn't recognize our location, and we're going to talk about animals, animal control, and just a few other odds and ends that people get in trouble a lot with, it seems. Chief, how many animal calls do you get on average during the month?
We get quite a few animal calls, really spanning from barking dog complaints to loose or stray animals. We probably get around 15, 20 a month,
right,
actually. And, you know, sometimes those are calls that the officer goes out, never sees the stray animal or anything, right, but altogether probably average 15 to 20 a month.
Right, okay. Well, there seems to be a lot of misunderstanding, and I see people walking their animals without leash, and of course I'm not on duty, so to speak, but and then you get complaints about stray dogs. What is the leash law in Zebulon?
Actually, Zebulon, our ordinance follows the Wake County ordinance, which is specifically off of your property. Now, if you're on your property, your dog, of course, can run unleashed. But if you're off of your private property, then you can't allow an animal to run unattended. So basically that requires a leash if you're walking off of your property. We try to use a lot of common sense in our approach with enforcement of that. If a person has a very well-behaved dog and is walking with that dog right beside them, and maybe wouldn't have the dog on a leash, it's not something we're going to get all excited about.
Right.
But mostly that's not the case. Mostly when we have a leash law complaint, it's a dog that's running around the neighborhood, or it's running in the street, or it's actually become a nuisance. Right. But the basic premise of the leash law in all of Wake County is that if you're off of your own property, then your dog needs to be on a leash, needs to be in your immediate control.
Well, now there is an exception to that, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, that if I come to your house and you say it's okay for my dog
right.
to be off the leash on your property, then that's
absolutely
okay.
That's okay. Yeah, that is an exception. It's a private property exception,
right,
would fall under that. But like I said, if somebody has a very well-behaved dog, and I know that some people do, they've trained
right.
their dogs, and their dog can walk right beside them without being distracted by a cat or another dog. And if that's the case, while under the letter of the law it would probably be a violation, it's not something that we're really out to cause problems with people, but we are out to make sure that we can control animal complaints, because obviously a dog running loose can be a danger to passing motorists. A dog could be dangerous. It could be a dog that would bite, or it could just be a nuisance to people.
Right. Well, think about public park property like this park, and we have this station over here to clean up after your pet and this sort of thing. So obviously no one has, and I've heard what you said, but no one really has permission to have an animal off a leash in a public park or on a public street. Now, again, I know that caveat of what you just said, but is there any place that you can think of where a person could take their dog to?
We really don't have a place in town that is per se a dog park, or an area that a person could legally take their dog off leash and let the dog chase a frisbee or whatever. Our ordinance really hasn't provided for that as of yet. Although I know that there's been some interest over the years. Our board has talked about it. You guys have talked about it several times, and I anticipate with the addition of greenways and all walking trails that eventually probably we will have a dog park. But as for now, we really don't have an area in town that's public property. Although, like I say, if a person had a very well-behaved dog and was out, and that dog was not causing a nuisance or a problem, the police would only really respond and take care of that issue if it was complaint driven.
Right. And I understand that. I know Commissioner Strickland has brought up dog parks several times. And every time we go to prioritize the budget, especially the last few years, it's been a very tough situation to deal with, and that just hasn't been a high priority. But maybe we'll get there one of these days. I hope so.
Excellent.
I think there would be an interest in it. Well, let's say that you do have a barking dog complaint. What's the procedure?
Our ordinance as far as a barking dog, and actually anyone that wants to look at an ordinance can go on to amlegal.com. It's AM and then the word legal, and I think that stands for American Legal Company. But they can go to amlegal.com and they can find our ordinances on there and take a look at it. But our particular ordinance is under the nuisance part, that dogs aren't allowed, or animals aren't allowed to run unattended. Several factors in there. An animal that would maybe tip over garbage pails, that's mentioned. Several different things are mentioned in there, but your question specifically about the barking dog ordinance, our ordinance is that if a dog was to bark for 10 minutes consistently, then that's a violation of our ordinance, or for 30 minutes intermittently. And that again mirrors the county ordinance. And generally what will happen, an officer will get a complaint of a barking dog. They're usually at night. Occasionally we'll get them in the daytime with maybe a night shift person sleeping in the day or whatever. But when we get the calls, what an officer generally does is tries to slip into the neighborhood and roll down the windows on the police car and tries to hear the noise. As with all of our city ordinances, an officer has to observe or has to see the violation, actually take an enforcement on it. But generally the officer will go, they'll try to hear, and sometimes they can hear the dog barking, sometimes the dog's not barking by the time they get there. Our general practice is that if we don't hear the dog, we still try to contact the owner of the dog or wherever the noise is coming from and explain to them what our ordinance is and ask them to quiet their animal or to leash their animal. And then if we go back repeated times, then, or if the officer's able to hear the noise, then the officer would have the discretion to issue a citation.
Right, okay. Well, there's an awful lot of people walking their pets, and that's a wonderful thing. I know Zeb and I, or my wife and Zeb, walk a lot together. And there's certain considerations that you should have for other people's property, i.e. not turning them into the bathroom, I guess, is the number one. The other one is obviously to keep them on the leash so they don't just wander and chase other pets. But we have the cleanup station over here with bags. I happen to have brought this grocery bag to use as an example that you can put one of these in your pocket, and when your dog goes to the bathroom, you reach down, pick up the poop, and pick it up and fold the bag over, twist it up tight, and carry it and dispose of it properly instead of leaving it, in somebody's yard. You got any other thoughts on that? Or?
No, I mean, we do have the bags here. Zebulon doesn't have at this time, and it's not something that I really I think we have a big issue with, but some towns have ordinances that if you don't pick up after the dog, is actually a violation of the law.
Right.
But as you're saying, it's a courtesy, and really, if your dog goes onto somebody else's property, it's actually a trespassing issue,
right.
and it's a real annoyance to folks. But I do know the town has them out here in the parks, and most people always have grocery store bags in their house. Most people keep them for trash can liners or whatever, and certainly I think that's a good practice.
Well, I think so too. I think it's just considered who likes stepping in it,
right?
So it's something to keep in mind when you're out with your pets. How about cats?
Cats, actually under the ordinance says animal, that an animal cannot run unattended. So very technically a cat also is a violation of the ordinance, but we've all heard the expression, herding cats.
Right.
It's pretty difficult to do, and we really don't get that many cat complaints. But I would say that if you have a cat that goes outside or hangs out outside, it's also a common courtesy. It is to the letter of the law to keep the cat on your property, but also we've all probably had somebody's cat climb on our vehicles just after you wash it, and the cat climbs on it, and you have cat footprints all over your vehicle. Or cats can kill birds or can kill other small animals that may be around. So while we don't generally get these cat complaints, we do occasionally have stray cat issues. And what the police department does, while Zebulon Police Department is not really equipped to take care of these issues, animal control will come out, and animal control will place a trap, and they will trap the cats. They take the cat to the animal control center, and then if a person, they come to claim the cat, they have to pay a pickup fee and a storage fee for the animal. And then if it's not picked up, I believe it's adopted out eventually or something like that.
Well, let's talk about animal control a little bit. I mean, that is a Wake County function, I believe, and they will put traps not only for dogs or cats, but for other feral animals,
raccoons,
as
possums.
Well. Right, but they can't just come put a trap on your property, can they?
No, they won't. At first, you have to request a trap on your property.
Right.
And secondly, the traps are expensive, and a person has to sign an agreement for the animal control. They'll bring the trap out. You sign an agreement that if the trap is damaged or whatever, that there may be some monetary issue there.
Right.
And then it's your responsibility to check that trap, and if there is an animal trapped in it, then animal control comes out. They pick the animal up and take it to the shelter or whatever, so it can be fed and watered and all that. Again, the Zebulon Police Department doesn't do that,
Right.
but animal control does. The people in Zebulon are paying county taxes. That's a county service.
Right.
And so, but obviously, if they're animal control, they do these things during regular business hours. It's 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, and that's when you need to call them. And of course, the number for them is 919-212. You can call 919-212-PETS, PETS, which is 7387. Okay. You can call that number during regular business hours. After business hours, I think there's a button on there that will connect you with the Wake County Sheriff's Office, or you could call their dispatch directly at 919-856-6911. That's for animal control, and animal control will come out during regular business hours for stray animals, the whole number of animal complaints. After hours, however, you have to call the police department, and animal control then will only come out in case of an animal bite.
Right.
And I think an animal bite, they'll come out, or a suspected animal with rabies who may be around people or threatening people, or a dangerous animal, an animal that's growling at the neighbors and those kind of things. But you can call animal control for those issues during business hours. After business hours, you're going to have to call the local police department. That's Zebulon or anywhere in Wake County, actually.
Yeah, I assume the response time is pretty good, especially if you have a bite or what you consider a rabid animal, that sort of thing. I mean, one of the complaints you hear, not about animal control, but just in general, you've heard it for years. Oh, it took forever to get here, you know. So you have pretty good experience with that.
Animal control does a good job. The downside is usually they have one officer on call in all of Wake County. Now, the city of Raleigh actually has its own animal control unit.
Right.
But outside the city of Raleigh, you may have one person on call for the entire county. So obviously, if they're on a animal bite in Holly Springs and we have a animal bite in Zebulon, it could take a while. So certainly the police department will come on, we will respond, and we will take measures that's necessary to assist the public. And we have some snares, which are long-handled snares that our police officers have in our sergeant's car, that we could capture an animal if we had to, and we've done that. We've captured it and locked it in the backseat of a police car until animal control gets there. It's not our preferred method, but we will if we have to.
I'm sure. Well, I know that over the years there's been complaints of feral dog packs mainly coming in, and they'll come in from outside of town, and then by the time animal control or somebody gets there, they're back in the woods somewhere outside the city limits, and that's just something beyond your control. I mean, it's not. You can't make them be there when you
can't. We get lots of calls, and of course, anytime we get calls, we prioritize the calls, and or dispatch usually prioritizes them even prior to calling us. But if we get multiple calls at one time, we're going to prioritize those. And if it's a stray animal, obviously the officer will come out and take a look for it. But even if it's on the weekend and we find a stray animal, there's very little we can do with a stray animal. We don't have the facilities to house an animal, because when you house them, you got to feed them, you got to water them, you got medical needs or whatever to take care of them. So it is something to contact animal control during the week and have them come out and set a trap. I did forget to mention that an injured animal, if there's an animal that's been hit by a car or something and the owner's not there, animal control will come out and they'll pick that animal up and take it to an emergency vet clinic and do those things.
Let's suppose that they capture an animal that's loose. What do they do with it at that point?
If your dog is picked up, normally animal control will look, and if you have a tag on it that's got your phone number or your contact information, or if the dog is microchipped, animal control will get in contact with you and let you know where your dog is. You can also call animal control and ask them if they've picked up your dog. And there's a fine. There's a fee for them picking up your dog, and then also a fine for I think it's called a shelter fee that they charge you for housing your animal, and then that goes up each time. It's if you have repeat issues, then that fine and that cost actually goes up. After that. Again, that's done by animal control. The police department, we don't charge anything. We will pick up the dog. We call animal control in some cases, and they come and get it.
The point being, the effort is made to get it back to the owner if at all possible, and there is, as you indicated, a fine for it. But still, it's not like your pet is gone forevermore and animal control picks it up. Big thing is look after your pet on the front end, and that's just not going to happen. So, anything else briefly you can think about in animal control before we jump?
No, I think really, like you said, just keep your dogs under your control, your cats, your animals, and then also to have them properly a collar with a name tag on it, or microchipping is really a great thing. But really either one of those, as long as you have where your animal can be identified.
Right. Okay. For those that might not know, microchipping is a small chip, identification chip that's put under the skin, usually on the back of the neck, and then they scan it, and it tells the name of the animal, the owner, contact information, everything. It's pretty slick, and I don't know what it costs today. Initially for Zeb here, I think it was in the 40s, $45 or something like that. It's probably more today because Zeb's getting on in years. He's 13 now. So. But anyway, okay, thank you, Tim. Let's move and talk about parking issues and fire lanes. I mean, I know that is, it can be a sore subject for your officers as well as for the general public.
It can be, Mayor, and I'll tell you the problem we still see, everybody understands the handicap vehicle, the handicap parking space issue, that if you park in a handicap parking space and you don't have a handicap placard that's visible, you're going to get a citation. And that's just it, either a civil ordinance citation or a state citation on a handicap vehicle. It's we have the option to write either one of those. Some of our ordinances we only write on the city ordinance, some or town ordinance. Some we can write on both. But we get a lot of issues with handicap placards where people say, you know, I had a handicap placard, it was under the seat, it was in the trunk, I forgot it, those kind of things. And you know, there can be some leniency at times by the courts, but the officer's going to write that ticket if he doesn't see or she doesn't see that handicap placard. Also, what we see at times is people who are using a handicap placard that belongs to their dad or their grandmother or their aunt, and that's also illegal to use that placard. So first step, I want to mention that. Second step is fire lanes. We still have, we've actually curbed it quite a bit with our citation process, but still we occasionally get people who park in fire lanes, and generally what they want to say is, you know, I just ran in to get a gallon of milk, I just ran in to get a loaf of bread, and obviously if everybody that just ran in to get a loaf of bread parked in the fire lane, we'd have an issue. Obviously, if there was a fire while you were just getting a loaf of bread, we could have an issue. So parking in the fire lanes is not permitted, period. And not only is it not permitted, our ordinance is pretty clear, as most ordinances are, that includes vehicles that are attended. People think, well, as long as I leave, you know, so-and-so in the passenger seat or in the back seat, I can run in. That does not exempt you from parking in a fire seat. In the driver's seat, even. Yeah, absolutely.
Because I see that a lot where someone will pull up, stay behind the driver's seat, kid jump out, or a spouse will jump out and run in, and they'll sit right there. So,
right. That is, our ordinance is very specific that says you cannot park in a fire lane whether the vehicle is attended or unattended. The only exception to parking in a fire lane is if you are actively loading or unloading a vehicle. Putting groceries in, taking groceries out, the laundromat, putting clothes in, and that's the only exception to that. And that the vehicle does have to be attended. You can't leave it parked in the fire lane, go in to get and say, well, I was loading and unloading. The vehicle must be attended while you're loading and unloading.
It needs to be obvious that that's what
it needs to be obvious that's what you're doing. And I'm going to tell you, our officers don't just try to sneak up on people doing this. What we generally do is an officer will sit and observe the vehicle. And if he sees a person come out in a very reasonable amount of time, you know, 1 minute, 2 minutes, and the person comes out with their laundry and puts it in the car, the officer's most likely not going to cite them. Right. But what we see most of the time is an officer will sit and watch the car for 15 minutes, and then the person says, I was loading or unloading, and that's really not what the law is intended for.
Right, I understand. Fire lanes are for a public safety purpose, and that needs to be remembered when you pull there.
It's kind of a domino
Nobody
effect.
thinks this place is going to catch on fire, and 100 people are going to run out the front door, and I'm not going to be able to move, and on and on.
Right.
I mean, it's going to be a domino effect.
It's going to be a mess. Domino effect. It causes more and more issues, and also it's kind of like, you know, the child who says, well, that person did it.
Yeah.
So if there's one person parked in the fire lane, somebody else is going to say, well, they're doing it, and they're going to park, and then you end up getting massive people parked there. One other thing I want to mention about our parking ordinance is we've had recently a few issues with commercial vehicles parked in residential neighborhoods.
Right.
It's like box trucks or, you know, commercial trucks, tractor trailers at times, other sorts of commercial vehicles. And our ordinance, again, if you have a question, you can look on our ordinance on the internet, or you could call the police department or our planning department, and we can explain that to you. But you can't park a commercial vehicle in a residential neighborhood, and we've gotten a few of those complaints kind of started back up recently. And generally, again, we go out, we knock on the door, we say, look, we understand you're a truck driver for a living, but you're living in a subdivision, you can't park your commercial vehicle here overnight. And generally we get compliance by that, but occasionally we've had to issue some citations.
Well, there's another reason for that. I mean, you see signs around town as you enter residential districts that said no trucks, you know, this sort of thing. And it really has to do with the design weight limitations
of the weight
on,
of the road.
On the road itself. I mean, your highways out here, like 64, 264 up here, they're designed to carry the weight of heavy vehicles. The street behind me here is not. And that's one of the other reasons, other than a nuisance to the neighborhood. And obviously, if somebody's moving in, they've got to have a truck
There's
come
exceptions.
in. There's exceptions to every rule. But that's one of the reasons is the streets are just not designed to carry that heavy weight load, and it wears them down. And then people fuss because we've got potholes and rough roads and things they don't like.
One of the issues we had recently was a commercial truck was a refrigerator truck, and the guy that owned it would start the truck up or have the freezers running on the truck for long periods of time, and it was a real nuisance to some folks. But anyhow, I just wanted to mention that while we were talking about it.
Well, Tim, that'll be a real good segue into noise. We'll talk a little bit about noise ordinances. So let's start by talking about residential noise.
Okay, residential. Our noise ordinance there is designed to give people a sense of when you're in your house that you're not being bothered by somebody else's stereo or somebody else's noise at their residence. And the way our ordinance is specifically written, there's usually two things. One is written either a decibel or one is a distance measurement. And what we use in Zebulon, because decibels bring with them a lot of other equipment, brings a lot of training, recertification on decibel meters and all of those sorts of things. So we use a measurement, and the way the ordinance is written is that if you have, you're at your house and you hear somebody else's music and it's very loud and it's disturbing you, an officer can come out, and if they hear the music, which also falls back to that, an officer actually has to hear that violation. And the officer then will check the distance from the house to where the sound is coming from. And it's not something that we look at, if it's 51 feet. What we're looking to see, is this really a disturbance? Is it really a nuisance?
Is it a nuisance, yeah.
Most of the time, again, an officer can go out, talk to the person, say your music is loud, and we're able to handle that. If we go out repeatedly, or if it's one of those situations where the officer leaves and the noise returns, then the officer can issue a citation for that. We really don't have a big problem with noise ordinance violations. We have, I think maybe we get, on an average, about 2 calls a month, and generally those are satisfied by the officer going out and contacting the violator.
If my memory is correct, I believe it's 200 feet is what that's in the ordinance.
It's different. It's from a house.
Right.
I really don't remember.
Yeah. That's fine.
That's one of the things I read.
That's fine. But
it's from a vehicle is less. A vehicle is 50 feet.
Oh, okay.
And I believe a residence actually is 100 feet.
Okay. Well, the point being is it needs to truly be a nuisance. I mean,
It does,
just because you can hear something doesn't mean
I
it's
actually
a
had printed
violation.
off that ordinance, and to tell you the truth, I know that, and 99% of the time I could tell you exactly the amount of feet, but
Well, that's
I
fine.
just
Anybody
forget
that's
that.
interested can call you and get it. But, again, I think we need to stress it needs to be nuisance noise. Just because we can hear the cars driving by, and that's not a nuisance.
you can hear a lawnmower, you
Yeah.
can hear sound carries a lot. If you hear somebody, if somebody turns on the radio and you can hear it, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a nuisance,
Right.
because you can hear it at that distance.
Right.
But if that's, when you can't hear your own radio or your own television,
Right.
then it gets to be a
How about
a real
commercial?
problem.
Is it different?
It is from a business. There's some sounds from a business that are considered normal business sounds. The sound of a car wash, the sounds of industrial work going on in a commercial facility. Normally, the only calls we get from commercial establishments are when they have something special going on, something outdoors. For instance, Glaxo, every year they have a big outdoor event, and they have a band and they have music and all that.
Right.
And for a commercial site, they can actually get an exemption. They can get a permit to have between certain hours, and that's all outlined in our ordinance. Between certain times, they can have an outdoor event. Recently, Piggly Wiggly had an event out in their parking lot.
Right.
They had a band,
Right.
and you can get an ordinance exemption to do those sorts of things.
Well, we have those here in the park. For example,
We do.
Music in the Park program here during the summer in Whitley Park, and then we have the Festival on the Lawn where we have food. So yes, there are exceptions. So you briefly touched on vehicles, but let's talk about loud mufflers and the nuisance noise from vehicles.
Right. You know, mufflers is another thing that's kind of hard to to put your finger on. You know, what is loud, what's past the ordinance, what is a nuisance. But if an officer were to get a complaint, and we've had them in particular neighborhoods where somebody has a vehicle that's in disrepair and their muffler is so loud that it's disturbing people, an officer can stop that person and write them a citation for that. Also for their music, if their music is excessively loud, if it's over 50 feet from the vehicle that you can hear that noise, then the officer can stop that person again. And we all really know, if you really just think about it, you know what's a nuisance. I mean, you can hear somebody's radio, but it's not that bad.
Right.
That's probably not a violation of the law. But when you're sitting at a traffic light and your rearview mirror is shaking because the two cars behind you, stereo is too loud, that's probably a pretty good estimation that it's outside of our ordinance, right?
I got you. Well, thank you, Tim. I know that we get questions on all of these. Let's talk just for a minute about the enforcement and civil fines process that we have.
A couple of years ago, we started a civil ordinance process, and when we did that, we actually did a show on that civil process, and it's still in place. It's we've worked out a lot of bugs over it throughout the years, and we generally can, on some ordinances, they are strictly a violation of the town ordinance, and it's not mirrored by state law, so we only write town ordinances on those. And on those particular ordinances, if we write them, a person has 10 days to pay the fine, whatever, and the fines range from very low fines to $25, $50 in some circumstances. But most of the time they're very low. They're always far lower than what you're going to pay if you're given a state citation. Court cost now is over $180 on a state citation. So a state citation is going to be a lot more expensive. Plus, it could be something that would go on your driving record, or it could go on a permanent record. If you're given a civil ordinance, it's not on your insurance. It doesn't go on a driving record. It's not considered a criminal violation that you have to put on an application later. But you simply have 10 days to come down to the finance department in the town hall, Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, and you pay that citation off. There is an appeal process if you feel that that you didn't violate the law. Now, the appeal process doesn't consider what your excuse may be. If your excuse is, well, I was only in the store for 5 minutes getting a loaf of bread, that's not what the appeal process is set up for. It's if you were not in violation, there was the officer made a mistake by issuing that citation, then you could, there's an appeal fee that you pay. If your appeal is granted, then you're refunded that money. A state citation, on some laws that officers only issue state citations. Other things, the officer has the option. Like I mentioned, a handicap violation. If an officer cites you on a handicap violation, you may only pay $50 in town, but if he issues you a state citation, it's going to cost you very likely $250. Plus, it's inconvenience of having to go downtown and.
The bad news is you got a ticket. The good news is it didn't cost you as much.
Right. And we really, on our ordinance, we try to do those by talking to people, by saying, hey, don't park here.
Right.
Handicap placards are really probably the exception to that. An officer is pretty quickly going to write a citation for a vehicle that's sitting in a handicap spot without a placard.
And the thing is, put the placard in the window.
Put it where you can see it.
I was in the grocery one day, and a guy came in. Actually got paged outside the store because he parked in a handicap. He came back in. I really had to bite my tongue because he was like, "Oh, they're going to give me a ticket," and I was a handicap thing. He said, "I just forgot to hang it on the window. It was under the seat." Well, the guy can't read your mind. I mean, he didn't know.
Right.
So, the thing is, use some common sense. If you have it, put it up there. If you're not entitled to use it, don't. Walk 10 more feet or 20 more feet or whatever.
I know, I could certainly use to walk a few more feet anyhow.
I know, that's for sure. Well, the civil citation process on the appeal, you go before a local board comprised of people from staff, citizen, this sort of thing.
Right.
And they hear your appeal and then make determination.
They make a
from
determination,
there, so.
and then if your citation's overturned, then you owe nothing, and your fee is returned.
And that's held at town hall.
And that is held at town hall.
periodically.
They're set up to be held quarterly.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, let's jump over to the torch run for a minute. Let you tell us about
I did
that.
want to mention the torch run. We're going to be putting out some other things on this, but the torch run is a run for Special Olympics. It is the only fundraiser that's actually supported by police across the world, really. And here in North Carolina, we have the North Carolina Torch Run for Special Olympics. And this year, it's actually going to be held May 29th. I told you May 23rd to start with, but it's May 29th. And for the first year, for years, the officers have run the torch run. And this raises money for Special Olympics. And there's T-shirts, and we sell T-shirts, we sell hats, we take donations for Special Olympics. And the Zebulon Police Department, we run the torch from the police department, and we run it up Arundel Avenue, down Gannon to Little River Park. Where at Little River Park, we turn it over to the Wake County Sheriff's Office, and they run the torch from, I think the Wake County Sheriff's Office and the District Attorney's Office run it together. They run it to Knightdale, and then Knightdale Police Department run it on into Raleigh, where Raleigh Police Department pick it up. Well, this year we're actually inviting the public to run with us. It's always just been the police, but this year we're inviting the public. If they would like to show their support for Special Olympics, they can. The only thing they need to do is buy a T-shirt.
Right.
It's not like a 5K where you pay a fee to run for the fundraiser, but it is a fundraiser. So you're asked to buy a T-shirt or a T-shirt and a hat. And if you buy that T-shirt, you can come, and we're going to meet at 8 o'clock in the morning on the 29th at the Zebulon Police Department here, and then we'll run that torch. It's about 3 miles that we'll run it to Little River Park. We also will follow behind in a van, and if a person gets a little tuckered out and they have to hop in the van a minute, they can do that, and we'll have usually we have drinks and bananas and things like that for somebody as well. But we certainly would like to invite the public to come out and run with us this year, and we'd love to see them show up.
And let me stress that it's more of a leisure run as opposed to a race where you're really having to turn it on. I mean,
there's no time.
You can run at your own pace and whatever you're comfortable with.
There's no time limit. It's really, we do it kind of, it's kind of a slow jog, or maybe what they used to call an airborne shuffle.
You don't have to be a full-blown jog.
Right. It's not anything like a marathon that you're out there, or the Olympics. It's for the Special Olympics. It's for fun.
Yeah.
It's for a good cause, and the money raised goes. We don't keep any money locally or at the police department. Everything goes. We turn it back into Special Olympics, and they use that for Special Olympics athletes to pay for their travel, pay for their rooms, and pay for that those festivities.
Well, folks, I hope you'll turn out and give support to that. If you want to just buy a T-shirt or hat and don't run, that would help.
You can come to the police department between regular business hours and buy a T-shirt
or make
a
a donation. Your support would be appreciated for that. Well, Tim, we've covered a fair amount of ground, and I appreciate your time and helping the public understand some of this, because I know these questions come up all along, and we have a lot of new people moving into the community, might not be as familiar with our local ordinances as some of the old timers, if you will. So, but if anybody has a question, it's just a simple matter of getting in touch with your department.
Certainly.
And if you call me, I'm going to tell you how to get in touch with them if you can't figure out how to get with you, but you have people there to work with folks and answer questions for them. And,
I want to remind people also, we've talked about this before, but on these animal complaints, or if you need to contact the Zebulon Police Department for any of these issues, call 911. 911,
right.
And people try to call the police department, or they try to call the sergeant's phone or whatever, and that the sergeant may be busy on a call. The police department, the person, the admin assistant at the desk may have 3 things going on. Right. If you need the police, if you call 911 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, that call goes into Wake Raleigh 911, and they will dispatch an officer.
And we contract with 911 simply for that purpose. Now, I always tell people, if you're calling 911 and it's not an emergency, identify immediately, this is not an emergency, but I need.
Right.
And if, they may have to triage you and prioritize you and say, well, okay, hold for a minute. Whereas if it was a car accident with bodily injury, they wouldn't do that. But anyway, you need to identify the purpose of your call fairly quickly so that they can understand the urgency or lack of it, if you would. So, but I appreciate you taking the time. I hope we've answered questions. Zeb here has been real good today.
He has been.
Yeah, you're a good fella. I'm gonna give him a cookie. There you go, buddy.
Did you bring any cookies for me?
Actually, you and I neither one need them. So, but anyway, folks, I hope you found this information useful, and we'll see you next month.
I prefer chocolate chip if you bring me one.
All right, I'll keep that in mind.